Yeah, maybe.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وعنده مفاتح الغيب لا يعلمها إلا هو ويعلم ما في البر والبحر وما تسقط من ورقة إلا يعلمها ولا حبة في ظلمات الأرض ولا رطب ولا يابس إلا في كتاب مبين. Inshallah, today I want to turn to not necessarily misconceptions, but I want to turn to topics that are usually discussed and misunderstood when people talk about Islamic spirituality, tasawwuf, Sufism today. Today meaning, let's say like the last 100, 150 years. This is by no means an exhaustive list. I only have 6 broad points. But the reason I delayed this is because it was important that we lay down, what tasawwuf is in Islam, where it comes from the Quran, where it comes from the Sunnah, how it's expanded throughout Islamic history, etc. And now we can talk about some of the things that people usually associate incorrectly with Islamic spirituality. Now, the problem with misconceptions is if somebody doesn't understand something or misunderstands something, it automatically becomes a misconception. So misconceptions can be endless if people don't know anything. So we're not here to discuss all of the misconceptions. That's sort of impossible. But these are big enough that I think we hear them. Frequently. So the first thing that is frequently discussed, or you will find when you talk about Islamic spirituality, is you will clearly see the centrality of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in discussions of Islamic spirituality, in the literature of Islamic spirituality, in the gatherings of tasawwuf, etc., there is a very, very overt focus on the person of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the reason is because, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. Say, if you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, follow me, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will love you. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. And verily, in the Messenger of Allah is a perfect and beautiful example, etc. So the idea is that because the Quran makes it a focus, there is a focus on the person of the Prophet ﷺ. Now you might think, well, why is this a misconception? Well, like I said, it's not a misconception. The person of the Prophet ﷺ is supposed to be a focus for us as Muslims. But in the discussions of Islamic spirituality, it's very overt. It's in the space of Islamic spirituality where this is emphasized. It's in the space of Islamic spirituality where this is expressed. It's in the space of Islamic spirituality, the literature of Islamic spirituality, where this is spelled out. What does that mean that the Prophet ﷺ is an example? What does that mean that we are meant to follow? So the Sufi perspective of these verses is that we are to submit ourselves completely to the authority of the Prophet ﷺ. So, for example, in Surah An-Nisa, verse 65, Allah says, فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِي مَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُم. Indeed, you do not truly believe until you allow the Prophet ﷺ to judge between you in your affairs. And in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, لَا يُؤْمِنُ أَحَدُكُمْ حَتَّى يَكُونَ هَوَاهُ تَبْعًا لِمَا جِئْتُ بِهِ. None of you truly believe until your nafs, until your desires are in submission with what I brought. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, this is very clear, Quran and Sunnah. But the emphasis, therefore, is, this extra focus on the person of the Prophet ﷺ. Whether it be imitating the way that the Prophet dressed, whether it be imitating the way that the Prophet ate, whether it be whatever the case may be, it's in this discussion of Islamic spirituality where everything related to the Prophet ﷺ is very, very overt. Now, if you understand the Quran and Sunnah, you see that that's like a Islam thing. It's not an extra thing. This is what we're supposed to be doing. Allah Ta'ala says, Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabiyya ayyuha alladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Allah talks about the importance of the Prophet ﷺ, saying that himself and the angels send prayers and salutations on the Prophet ﷺ, and then commands that we do the same. So when you read that's a big deal. That means that the Prophet ﷺ is a big deal. So in the discussions of Islamic spirituality, there is this tradition of love and praise and celebration for the person of the Prophet ﷺ as a way to facilitate following these verses, that we are able to submit to the Sunnah, that we are able to submit to the example of the Prophet ﷺ. So it's not just, we read the verse and we know that the Prophet is important. No, this is sort of the way you carry out those verses. It happens in this space of Islamic spirituality. One of the ways that this has been facilitated for us is that we have a tradition of manuals of prayers on the Prophet ﷺ. So every major Muslim language, every major Muslim culture, they have a tradition in which a tradition of praise of the Prophet ﷺ. So here I'm thinking of things like Dala'il al-Khairat, which is probably one of the most famous, at least in the western part of the Muslim world. And there are other books like that, in which it's just a litany of different salawat and prayers on the Prophet ﷺ that you would recite on every day of the week, or you would recite once a week, or you would recite in a gathering, or you would recite after Jummah prayer, or whatever the case may be. But there's a tradition of prayers and praise of the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Well, other than the fact that Allah commands us to do that, but it is therefore a way to remind ourselves of the importance of the Prophet ﷺ in our daily lives. And this will become clear when we talk about some of the other things. Okay? So this is the first, and that's why I don't want to call them misconceptions. This is the first frequent, one of the ubiquitous features of discussions of Islamic spirituality is that you will find an overt praise and focus on the person of the Prophet ﷺ. So if you understand that, then you can understand all of the other cultural things that have. So for example, one of the things that's new to me, it's not necessarily something that I grew up with, but the traditions of Southeast Asia, it's very common that many people will have artifacts that belong to the Prophet ﷺ. So there are families and mosques that will have, a hair of the Prophet ﷺ's beard, or a hair from the Prophet ﷺ's head, or a piece of his clothing, or something like that. And when there's a big, it's like Laylatul Qadr, or it's the day of Eid, or something like that, they'll bring it to the mosque, and everyone will, come and seek blessings from it and things like that. In my culture, it's not as common, but it exists. But in the southeast, in the subcontinent, it's very, very common. And again, why is that? Because all of this is from the point of view of that this is a person of devotion, this is an object of devotion, this is a person who we must submit to. How can you submit to somebody that you don't love? How can you love somebody that you don't know? Etc., etc., etc. Right? So this is a major theme that people need to understand, the focus on the Prophet ﷺ. Related to this is the second theme, which is the focus on the family of the Prophet ﷺ, the Ahlul Bayt. And again, this is not a function of tasawwuf or Islamic spirituality. This is a function of Islam. Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةِ فِي الْقُرْبَى, verse 23 in Surah Ash-Shura, that the Prophet ﷺ does not ask from us any payment or anything except that we honor and love his family. So this is a verse in the Quran. And there are many hadith that talk about the exalted status of, say, the Fatima, for example, the daughter of the Prophet. As a matter of fact, when Imam al-Bukhari came to write the Sahih collection, in the heading, in the exalted status of Lady Fatima, he said, Babu Fadli Fatima alayhi salam. He said the section or the chapter in the exalted status of Lady Fatima upon her be peace, alayhi salam. He wrote that. So, and the hadith about Al-Hasan and Al-Hussein and the hadith about Imam Ali, all of that reminds us of the importance of the family of the Prophet. In Sahih Tirmidhi, the Prophet he said, I'm going to leave for you two things. If you hold to them, you won't be lost. Kitabullah, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa itrata ahl bayti, and the pure ones, my family. Many Muslims, Sunni Muslims, when they recite that hadith, they say, I'm leaving for you two things. If you hold to them, you won't be lost. Kitabullah and my Sunnah. That's the hadith that is narrated in Imam Ahmad. But in Imam Tirmidhi, which is one of the six sihah, the six canonical collections of hadith, the wording is the book of Allah and my family. And this is a miracle of the Prophet ﷺ, that he has this hadith, because all of the Prophet's children died in his lifetime except Sayyidah Fatima. All of them died in his lifetime. But yet he said, I'm going to leave for you my family. So that was a miracle that the Prophet ﷺ knew or was inspired to say that now the people that are related to the Prophet ﷺ are probably like 20, 30 million people around the world. And most Muslim majority countries, they have an authority that certifies people's family, the family names, and they keep track of who's related to the Prophet ﷺ and things like that. Anyway, the family of the Prophet, the progeny of the Prophet ﷺ, are therefore a reminder of the Prophet himself, which is itself a reminder of the things that we just said, that this is the one that Allah has chosen for this final message, and He has given us as a beautiful example, etc., etc., etc. So, works and poems in praise and in love of the family of the Prophet is, again, a very focal point in the discussions of Islamic spirituality, as a key tool to remind us of the obligation and the importance that we have, not just to the family of the Prophet, because he told us, Allah reminds us in the Quran, but also as a way that it reminds us of the importance of the Prophet. Now, this is an important tangent to this. Some people, they have the misconception that for some reason, tasawwuf is a gateway to Shia Islam. So some Sunni Muslims, they have this misconception. And as a matter of fact, it's exactly the opposite, because the Shias historically don't like tasawwuf, don't like Sufism. And they have a lot of literature against tasawwuf for a whole host of other reasons. But the fact that tasawwuf emphasizes for the Sunni community the importance of the family of the Prophet ﷺ itself, what made tasawwuf a bulwark against tashayyu. So it was the proliferation of tasawwuf throughout the Muslim world, in both the West and the East, that was really a bulwark against the Shia doctrine spreading, precisely for its emphasis on the Ahlul Bayt. I remember one time I went to the Shia mosque. They asked me to go to speak. I'm all interfaith, intrafaith. It's all good, So I gave a talk about. I think I gave a talk about Imam Ali. So I really got into it. So after I finished, the Imam, he pulled me to the side. He said, I was listening to you and I thought you were Shia. Right? I said, no, this is our teaching. This is Islam. This is like Islam 101. Right? That reaction right there, that's what I'm trying to highlight. The Shia, and this is not, I'm not trying to say something that's anti-Shia. I'm talking about history, and I'm unapologetically a Sunni Muslim. So I will always do my best to articulate what Sunni Islam is. But one of the things that the people of Tashayyu try to emphasize is the lack of respect that some people in the past had towards the family of the Prophet. And if anyone doesn't respect the family of the Prophet, I don't want anything to do with them. And that was the perspective of the Sunnis before us. So we also don't like that. We also have a problem with that. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, radiallahu anhu, you can't get much more Sunni than that. He has a book called Fada'il al-Sahaba, the great traits of the Sahaba. It's like 2 volumes. 2/3 of the book is about the greatness of Imam Ali, and then 1/3 of the book mentions all of the other companions. So we have no problem with the love of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. But historically, what's interesting is when people say, "Oh, tasawwuf is like a gateway to tashayyu'," it's actually quite the opposite. If anything, it's the focus on the family of the Prophet ﷺ. Amongst Sunni Muslims, amongst the people of tasawwuf, that was a bulwark against tashayyu'. Anyway, so point number 2 is there is this massive focus of literature, devotional works towards the family and love of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. So if you go throughout the Muslim world to the major cities in which the famous Ahlul Bayt lived, you will see the physical monuments that were left, the size of the masajid, the size of the tombs, the cultural impact that the family of the Prophet ﷺ left on the consciousness of the Muslim community. So, like, for example, Imam Shafi'i, radiallahu anhu, who lived in Egypt and was a contemporary of Sayyidina Nafisa, who was one of the female descendants of the Prophet ﷺ, he had made it known that when he dies, that he wants his body taken to her house so that she can pray janazah over him. So when Imam Shafi'i died, radiallahu anhu, they took his body to her house, she prayed janazah, and then he went, to where he's currently buried. They prayed janazah there, like the big janazah, and then he was buried. It was like Imam Shafi'i, this is like a big deal for him. Sayyidina Nafisa, she is, this is like the granddaughter of the Prophet. How could I not love and respect her? So on and so forth. So you find this a lot. Again, it's not a misconception for me. I understand what it means. It's very clear. It's from the Quran and the Sunnah. But you can see how some people might. I don't know. I don't know what goes on in the mind of people that have misconceptions. But it is what it is. I'm not trying to make fun of somebody. I'm just saying, honestly, I don't know where the misconception comes. But I'm trying to explain. The third thing is dhikr with numbers. So this is another big topic that I hear. Somebody will say, why did you tell so and so, to say La ilaha illallah like 1,000 times, or why did you read the Surah Al-Ikhlas 50 times? Where did this stuff come from? All right? Is there a hadith that says that? Is there a verse in the Quran that says that, etc.? So again, and this is a misconception. So this maybe is more like a misconception. No, there's no hadith that says this stuff. But there is a command to do it. Where does this come from? How do we understand the Quran and Sunnah? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, idhkuru Allah dhikran kathira. O you who believe, remember Allah a lot. وَسَبِّحُوهُ بُكْرَةً وَأَصِيلًا. And remember Him night and day. So from the perspective of usul al-fiqh, the way that we interpret the Quran and Sunnah, this is an open command. It's an absolute command. There are no limits to it. It's not like the prayer where we pray 5 times a day, or Ramadan where we fast the month of Ramadan 29 or 30 days, or the Hajj that has to take place in these days of Dhul Hijjah. It's not like that. Dhikran kathira. And in the hadith of, where is the hadith? Sahih Muslim. In Sahih Muslim, Sayyidah Aisha alayhi salam, she said that the Prophet sallam remembered Allah in all of his modes, all the time. Kulla ahwali. The Prophet sallam remembered Allah all the time. Everything that the Prophet did alayhi salatu salam, he had dhikr involved with it. All the time. Every waking moment of his life. Even when he was sleeping. Because he said, I'm not like you. My eyes sleep, but my heart is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So one of the khasa'is, one of the special traits of the Prophet is he did not sleep the way we sleep. His eyes were shut, but his heart was awake with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he was remembering Allah all the time. So there's no limit. And because there is no limit, you can't say La ilaha illallah 1,000 times or 10,000 times or 15,000 times. And I remind you of what we said in the way beginning, that one of the things that's important as we sort of articulate our spiritual discipline is that the experience of the people before us is part of how we form this structure. So as long as things are based on the Quran and the Sunnah, but we have found, okay, I found that when somebody says this 1,000 times, it has impact on them. But when they say it 10 times, it doesn't. So that's where all of these numbers come from. It comes from trial and error, it comes from ijtihad. You know, mention this name of Allah Ta'ala 10,000 times. That, you know, it's just that that's the impact that it has. Could I mention it less than that and it has an impact? But usually that doesn't happen. So a lot of ijtihad goes in the ulama in assigning these different formulas and these different dhikr, and that's where the numbers come from. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrates in Sahih Muslim this hadith. He said, "Sabaqa al-mufarridun." The unique ones have advanced. The Sahaba said, "Who are they, Ya Rasulullah?" And then the Prophet is the one that said that. "Sabaqa al-mufarridun." And the Sahaba said, "Who are these?" And the Prophet said, "الذاكرون الله كثيرا والذاكرات." The men and women that remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a lot. In this, the famous hadith of Imam al-Tirmidhi, Abu Hurairah narrates this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, ألا أخبركم بخير أعمالكم وأزكاها عند مليككم. Shall I not narrate to you, tell you the best of actions for you, and the one that has the greatest of ranks from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وأرفعها في درجاتكم, and the one that will raise your hisab, will raise your ranks, the highest of ranks. وخير لكم من إنفاق الذهب والفضة, and better than you spend gold and silver, meaning giving money and charity. وخير لكم من أن تلقوا عدوكم فتضربوا أعناقهم ويضربوا أعناقكم, and it's better that you would meet your enemy on the battlefield and you would strike them and they will strike you. So the Prophet ﷺ says, let me tell you what's better than all of these things. They said, of course, Bala ya Rasulullah. He said, Dhikrullahi Azza wa Jalla, the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the highest form of devotion and obedience we have after, of course, doing our fard. The greatest tool that we have is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when I mentioned today in Jummah, the famous dua al-Nasiri, Muhammad ibn Nasir al-Dara'i, this was their way of fighting the physical threats against the Moroccan people. It was by turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in remembrance. So when you have something that great, you can't put a limit to it. So because there's no limit and because the Sharia allows the unlimitedness of it, therefore that's where these numbers come from. Okay, number 4, public dhikr and movement in dhikr. This is, I admit, this is also controversial, or this is misconception, let's say. So the people that gather in dhikr and they move when they make dhikr. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. The people that remember Allah standing, sitting, and lying down. There you go. So the Sufis are sometimes literal. Allah says, the people that remember Allah standing and sitting. So the movement in the dhikr comes from that. And also there are many hadith in after the prayer, when the prayer would end, the Sahaba, they would like move like this, maybe rock back and forth when they were making their dhikr, and there was no prohibition from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is one of those good bid'ahs. In other words, it's based on the principles of Islam, but the Sahaba, they didn't gather like that in the circle of the mosque and move up and down. Yeah, I know they didn't do that, but it's not haram because it's based on the principles of Islam. So this is where it comes from. Yeah, there's not much more to say about that. Right? I mean, take it or leave it. Okay, number 5, visiting the graves of the pious. So there's a lot of going to the graves with the people of Islamic spirituality. Where does this come from? It's narrated in Sahih Muslim that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Kuntu nahaytukum an ziyarat al-qubur." I used to forbid you from visiting the graves. Fazuruha. So, but now visit the graves. And in another hadith, فإنها تذكركم الآخرة, because it will remind you of the hereafter. So it's actually a sunnah to visit the graves because it reminds us of the hereafter. So for people, for example, that go to Medina and you go in the Prophet's mosque, usually after Fajr prayer, you finish the Fajr prayer and you exit the mosque, and then you go to the Baqiyah, which is sort of to the left of the mosque, which is the graveyard of Medina, and you visit the Sahaba, and etc. So it's a sunnah to go to the graves. Now, but other than the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ tells us to go to graves to remember the dead, and if you notice, one of the interesting things, by the way, in like the ancient cities of Islam, the graveyards now are really part of the city. Like in Damascus, if you drive around Damascus, Bab Saghir and all of those graves, it's like on your way to and from different parts of the city. So you're always passing the graveyard. If you're in Cairo, there are people that live in the graveyard. I mean, it's like you cut across the city by going to all the time. I mean, I was just in Cairo, and I passed through the graveyard at least no less than 20 times. It's normal. So it reminds you, this is where you're going to end up. You get frustrated at traffic, and then you look over, it's like, well, this is where it ends. Might as well, enjoy it while I can and get all of the hasanat that I can. So there's benefits in going to the grave. But there's another issue that's important for us to remember, which is, and as I always say, we understand death not as the end of life, but as the movement from one form of living to another form of living. Why do we have these dua that we say when we go to the grave? Why did the Prophet ﷺ, after the Battle of Badr, talk to the people that were dead and buried? Because the dead hear. Because the dead are alive. They're not alive the way we are alive, but they are alive in another way. Right? Don't we believe that that's part of our religion, right? We believe that when we die, we will have a hisab, that there is Jannah, there is Nar, that we will see and do, etc. So death is not the end of life. The people that freak out about Muslims going to the graves, really what's underlying that misconception, but they don't really understand it, is that they don't understand that death is not the end of life. They think that death is over. When you die, it's over. But it's not. Why don't we then cremate our bodies and just save space? No, we have to wash the bodies, and you have to wash the bodies with certain scent, and then you have to shroud the body with X number of shroud, and then you have to take the body to the mosque, and you have to pray the janazah prayer, and then you have to go, and you have to get in the grave, and you have to make sure that the body is comfortable. And why do we have all of these rules if it's over? Because it's not over. So when I go visit Imam Shafi'i, that's like I'm visiting Imam Shafi'i, not as if he was alive, because he is alive. So if I knew that Imam Shafi'i was at this mosque, you better believe it that I would drop everything and go and hang out with him and go give him salat. So when you go to the grave of Imam Shafi'i, you're visiting Imam Shafi'i. When you go to the grave of the Prophet, you're visiting the Prophet, you're visiting Sayyidina Abu Bakr, you're visiting Sayyidina Umar, etc. And there's a whole adab, there's a whole etiquette of how you do that. So that's where this comes from. Are there things that occur at the graves and at these like shrines that shouldn't? Yeah, of course, all the time. But the ulama always said that, one of the hallmarks of our scholarship and our tradition of usul al-fiqh is that when we look at an act, if there can be one excuse that makes that act permissible, we always look at it from that point of view. And that's why none of the ulama throughout any of the centuries ever accused any of these public shrine and places, these people committing shirk. It's never happened in the history of Islam except until the modern world. Ignorant people, they do, silly things, and somebody will like write like a note to Imam al-Shafi'i and throw it in his grave, and stuff like that. But no one would ever say, oh, this is shirk. But rather they say this is out of their love of Imam al-Shafi'i, or this is out of the respect for who this person or this saintly person was, etc., etc. Is it optimal adab? No, it's not. Because if Imam al-Shafi'i was there, he probably wouldn't be throwing a piece of paper in his face. But is it like shirk and things like that? No. None of the ulama, Al-Baydawi and all of these great, Ar-Razi and Al-Ghazali and all of these great ulama, they were very forgiving when it came to these things. That's one of the hallmarks of Sunni Islam. And the Prophet himself, he said that Allah has prevented my grave from being worshipped. The Prophet told us that this will never happen. So this is a form of revelation. So we know that it's an impossibility. But you can't help yourself. That's Rasulullah. If you were there, sometimes you lose your composure. Like when my wife tells me because when she goes, she gets lumped in with Egyptian ladies. So when it's the Egyptian ladies' turn to go to visit the Prophet, they all do the zagharit and they all start talking to the Prophet. He's like, Ya Habibi, come live with us. We'll take better care of you. And it's out of their love. It's like relax, we smile. It's out of their love for the Prophet. So we have to look at these things that way. But anyway, so that was the graves. And then the last thing I want to talk about is tawassul, which is intercession, which actually is a fiqh issue. It's not an issue of Islamic spirituality, but tawassul is a discussion of fiqh. What is tawassul? It's when people mention like the Prophet ﷺ or a saintly person, when they ask Allah, Ya Allah, I ask you by the Prophet ﷺ, help me out in such and such. So where does this come from? It comes from, first of all, the Quran in Surah An-Nisa, verse 64, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ إِذْ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ جَاءُوكَ وَاسْتَغْفَرُوا اللَّهَ وَاسْتَغْفَرَ لَهُمُ الرَّسُولُ لَوَجَدُوا اللَّهَ تَوَّابًا رَحِيمًا. Where that they wronged themselves and they came to you, addressing the Prophet ﷺ, and they asked Allah for forgiveness, and the Prophet ﷺ asks for their forgiveness, indeed they would find Allah most forgiving. And we believe, as we've said, because the Prophet ﷺ told us that the Anbiya are alive in their graves. So this verse is not just valid for the life of the Prophet ﷺ, but it's valid absolutely. So when you go to Medina, inshallah, may Allah bless us all to go, and you're standing there in front of the Prophet ﷺ, this is when you remember this verse. That's when you ask Allah for forgiveness. And you say, you address the Prophet. Don't you say, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah? You're speaking to him. Just like in the prayer, Tahiyyatu lillahi wa salat, Assalamu alayka, kaf al-mukhatab, Assalamu alayka. Salam to you, ya Rasulullah. So, who's closer to Allah, me or the Prophet? The Prophet. So, ya Rasulullah, please, help me out. Ask Allah for my forgiveness too. But who are you asking? You're asking Allah, not the Prophet. So this idea that you're asking the person in the grave instead of asking God, that's where that misconception comes from. Again, I'm just explaining it. I'm not saying, that non-adab things happen. That stuff, happens all the time. But still, all of the fatwa collections and all of the ulama that talked about this stuff, they forgave all of the people. Even the people that would slaughter an animal, be like, oh, I'm going to slaughter this calf for Sayyidina Hussein. And they said, yeah, this is just a form of tawassul and this is out of their love. And they never ever, once ever criticized them and accused them of shirk or, or something, crazy like that. The last thing I want to say about tawassul is there's a hadith in Imam al-Tirmidhi in which a blind man came to the Prophet ﷺ. It's a famous hadith of tawassul. And he asked the Prophet ﷺ to teach him a dua. And the Prophet ﷺ taught him a dua to ask Allah by mentioning the Prophet's name. And then after the Prophet ﷺ passed, the narrator of this hadith during the Khilafah of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu used to teach the same hadith to the people around him because he heard this dua. and Sayyidina Uthman, who was the Khalifa, didn't criticize him, meaning that this idea of tawassul is valid during the life of the Prophet ﷺ and also valid after the life of the Prophet ﷺ. So it's very common that you will find in formulas of supplication and things like that, that people will ask Allah by mentioning Allah's divine names, or ask Allah by mentioning the Prophet ﷺ's name, or ask Allah by mentioning the most pure act that you have offered, or ask Allah by Imam Chisti or something like that. So that's where that comes from. That tradition comes from. Again, not the cornerstone of Islamic spirituality, but I thought I would bring it up because it is a commonly discussed topic. I'm sure people have a lot of questions. So those are the 6 issues I wanted to discuss. I'm not going to keep going with these misconceptions. Next week we're going to wrap up the Islamic spirituality with something very practical, inshallah, and straightforward. But I thought I owed the subject to mention some of these concepts / misconceptions, because I know that unfortunately they get in the way of the truth. I respect that people have misconceptions. I also believe that this is a curse amongst our community, that we end up talking about the misconceptions more than we talk about what actually matters. So what matters is all the stuff that we've said in the last 7 lectures about how we can improve our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam wa a'lam. Yeah.
So someone was trying to tell me the other day that the surah,
إِنَّا أَعْطَيْنَاكَ الْكَوْثَرَ.
You're trying to tell me that the reason for the revelation of the surah was to let people not to visit the graves. Is there any element of truth to that?
No. أَلْهَاكُمُ التَّكَاثُرُ, meaning that you are going to be consumed by things all the way until you're about to enter the grave. Meaning the consumption of stuff, status and money and bling will occupy you all the way until you get to the grave. Meaning that it's too late.
Right. But he said, no, the Sheikh was explaining that it meant that this was specifically for you.
Have him come and talk to me. Straight him out. Yeah. The Prophet says, it's Sahih Hadith. You visit the graves because they remind you of the akhirah. The Prophet also said, mention often the destroyer of pleasures. Hadim al-laddat. Some of the Salaf, they used to dig their own grave and sit in their own grave and read Quran all night long. So that when they die, the spot in which they're going to be placed is a spot that has been mentioned Quran. I mean, it's really far out stuff.
And the prohibition that did exist against visiting graves, that was really against visiting the graves of the people of pre-Muslim times, right?
Yeah, and there was a time in the beginning in which the Prophet ﷺ did not want the people to engage in anything that would have a whiff of jahiliyyah. But towards the end of the life, this is an example of nasikh and mansukh. During the life of the Prophet, the Prophet ﷺ abrogated his prohibition of not visiting. He said, I used to say don't go, i.e. our understanding is because maybe there could have been a whiff of some jahili practice. But now that Islam is established and this jahili stuff is gone, go to the graves because it's a great reminder. And that's why part of the sunnah of visiting Medina is to also visit al-Baqiyah. And that's why they open the gates, at least once a day they have to, because it's a sunnah. I mean, it's an undisputed sunnah to go visit the Baqiyah. Yes?
You mentioned that there's this undue focus on the work, on the misconceptions about Sufism and Tasawwuf. And I've certainly been part of those discussions. And there are a lot of sheikhs to perpetuate some of these misconceptions, and people are afraid that they might be, doing something that may be bid'ah or that may be not exactly according to Sharia and fiqh. So they tend to stay away. Could you talk about what are some of the hallmarks of an authentic and sincere sheikh? Or how do you?
So we said, I think last lecture, we said that one is that there has to be some type of ijaza, some type of authorization and chain of transmission for that sheikh. So anybody that's going to teach this stuff, they have to be licensed to teach it. Just like if somebody's teaching tajweed, they have to be licensed to teach tajweed. If somebody's teaching, fiqh, they have to, know that madhab and etc. It's just that's basic, basic number one. Number two is that we look for a teacher and we look for a way that is closest to the sunnah of the Prophet. If there was anything that we needed in this life, the Prophet told us about it. So it's not like he forgot to tell us something. So we don't need anything extra. What we need to do is we need to know how to do the things that he told us to do and in what quantity. That's the key. Right? We don't need extra stuff. So sometimes people, they make people do extra weird things. Might not necessarily be bid'ah or haram, but it's like kind of weird. Let's just stay within basic Quran and Sunnah. So the next thing is we look for something that is closest to the Sunnah. Also because, as I said in the beginning of today's lecture, that is where the barakah is going to be. It's going to be in following the Prophet ﷺ. Right? So if there was something that we needed to do, he told us about it. Number three is we look for a way that's easy. So you look for a teacher that makes things easy for you. But if you find somebody that you don't have access to that's very difficult, or they make you, every time you talk to them, they make you do all this extra stuff, and they make you feel like you have to erase your whole life and start over and all this dramatic stuff, that's probably not going to be where you're going to succeed. You need somebody that makes things easy, because this was the way of the Prophet. Again, he was very easy with people. He took them where they are. He made them feel good about themselves. He took them where they are, and he took them where they needed to go. And the last thing is you need to have some kind of rapport with your teacher. So that's something that's subjective. So you might find all of these things, but you don't feel like that chemistry is not there between your teacher. And if you don't have that, usually it can be an impediment. So you also look for some kind of compatibility. Those are very basic, basic things. If there are specific questions, if somebody says, I saw this or I saw that, go ask the sheikh. If the sheikh can't answer that question, where in the Quran and the Sunnah that comes from, that's also a question. There is nothing that we have talked about that is not in the Quran and Sunnah. So we have to be able to find that answer. But just because you think something, I've never heard of that or I've never seen that, also don't be quick to judge, because maybe you don't know that it is, it is based on the Quran and Sunnah. Yeah.
So what if a sheikh is well established and has ijaza and has license, but their practices don't sit well? For example, from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was very humble. He dressed like the people around him. He didn't, elevate himself above others. He didn't have a throne or special robes or to distinguish him. So some sheikhs do that. They sit above other people. They have a special garb and so on. So that's not the Prophet's way. So, but this is a sheikh that's well established and has all the other credentials you mentioned. So, is that something that you should overlook, or is that
unless they ask you for money.
No, they don't ask for money.
No, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Allahu Jamilun yuhibbu jamil." Allah is beautiful, or His beauty, and He loves that which is beautiful. And as a matter of fact, He said that hadith in response to that exact question when the Sahaba said, "Yeah, but we like to dress nice and have nice things, and the Prophet ﷺ said, Allahu Jamilun yuhibbul jamal. And Imam Malik, radiallahu anhu, he dressed immaculately and he had a beautiful horse, and many of the ulama were wealthy. But after the time of the Sahaba, there became this specialization. So the ulama dress a certain way because then this is like, I'm the guy who asked the question because I'm wearing the red hat. That's where it comes from. But if I'm like with my teacher, I don't dress like this because I don't need that. I don't need somebody to come and ask me. You can ask him. So this is like work clothes. Like a professional clothes, for example, like a doctor wearing a lab coat or something like that. So it's not that one dresses like this to say that I'm better than you, but I dress like this to say that you can ask me a question. And Aiz ibn Abdul Salam, one of the great ulama, he was in Hajj once, and he was in his ihram, and there was an older man with him, and the man kept making a mistake. So he kept trying to point out the mistake, and the man wouldn't listen to him. And after they got out of their ihram, and he put on his cloak and his hat, the man apologized, and then he listened to him. So the dress, that's sort of where it comes from. But yeah, I mean, if somebody overdoes it and it just rubs you the wrong way, then maybe there's like no rapport. Is it like haram? No, because people can argue that in Muslim cultures, everyone makes fun of the ulama. And the ulama are like these backward, like poor, like ignorant people. So some people, and this is like a trend now, that they want to show, no, we take this seriously, and this is out of respect for the profession, out of respect for knowledge, etc., etc. It's not out of arrogance. So, it depends, I think, in the cultural setting. Sometimes the sheikh sits up so that people can hear him, by the way. I used to sit on the ground. You guys made me sit on the chair. I didn't ask for the chair. But the teacher is supposed to sit on a chair so that everyone can see him. And as a matter of fact, the chair of the university, that's where it came from. It came from the Muslim ulama that sat on actual chairs. That's where it came from. So,
Two quick questions. I feel good about the whirling dervishes.
Okay, but let me just hear this. The whirling dervish, we'll answer that.
And the ayah is also Imran. الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون. I think you said the physical manifestation that sometimes that is there. الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون can one actually say that that's also a quiet way of dhikr.
Yeah, the two main tools of your journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is dhikr and fikr. Exactly.
And then the second question again is an ayah from Surah Al-Jumu'ah. وإذا قضيت الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون. So the salah go.
Remember Allah a lot.
Allah says to be successful.
Yeah.
So that's for both the world and the.
Yeah, success in this world and the hereafter. The whirling dervishes. So that's like the most manifest way of public dhikr, and that is from the way of Jalaluddin al-Rumi, and again, all based on their ijtihad, that type of circular movement that mimics the movement of the tawaf around the Kaaba. That one hand is to the earth and that one hand receives, and that as you turn this way, you bring. It's the same way that you write the Arabic script, that it comes from outside and it comes towards your heart. All of those, it's ijtihad. And I know I met some of the mashayikh of that tariq, not like the performers, like the real thing. And it's a very deep, spiritual practice that takes a lifetime to learn. I mean, it's not like what people think. Sometimes they do it for like a show, but no, it's like a real dhikr, and it's usually they recite from the Mathnawi, they recite from the poetry of Imam Jalaluddin Rumi, and there's musical instruments, and as they are whirling, they are making dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's It's jihad. So it's based on the principles that we've laid out, and it's a manifestation of those principles, and it's beautiful. And I've seen it. I've seen it done. The real one done. It's really something else. It's very moving. It's very moving. I mean, that's not my way, but it's beautiful. So it works. I mean, yeah, circle, the orbit of the planets and the rotation of the Earth and the stars, etc. And also it's counterclockwise, so it's the same way of the tawaf around the Kaaba. It's counterclockwise. Also, the wrapping of the turban is supposed to be counterclockwise. That's how you can tell who's paying attention, how it's wrapped in the back. It's counterclockwise or clockwise. Yeah. It's also a passage in the Bible. I think we talked about that earlier. To everything there is a season, turn. Remember that khutbah when we had the accident in the mosque? When the ambulance came? So, kind of stole my khutbah thunder. I'm glad that brother was okay. Yeah, so the idea of turning, is a universal concept. And I think that's where it comes from. No.
So you said the second thing was our love and focus for Ahlul Bayt. So how can we reconcile that and the torture and a lot of discomfort that Ahlul Bayt themselves went through? So how can we reconcile that? And nowadays, having people, once you say Imam Ali or something, someone will be accused of, they have some sort of nasty tendencies. So how do we?
Imam al-Shafi'i was accused of being a Shia because of his love of Ahlul Bayt. So I mean, you're in good company. But all of the ulama of Sunnah Islam cursed Yazid, and they even said it's permissible to curse Yazid, but do not. Il'an Yazid wa la tazid, I think is the statement of Imam Ahmad. You can curse Yazid. Yazid was the Khalifa for 3 years. In 1 year, he destroyed the Kaaba. In 1 year, he attacked Medina. And in his last year, he killed Imam al-Hussein. And celebrated, and he was a drunkard. They would enter into him for him to come and lead the Jummah prayer. They'd find him drunk, drunk on a chair with a monkey on his shoulder. But we don't curse Muawiyah, because Muawiyah is a Sahabi, and he is from the people that wrote the Quran. He was one of the scribes of the Prophet ﷺ. So some Sunnis historically, they have issues with Muawiyah. But it's not from Sunni Islam to curse Muawiyah, because he's a Sahaba. Because to curse Muawiyah, or to curse any Sahaba for that matter, fundamentally means that the Prophet ﷺ failed. And that's the issue. That's the issue with the main thing between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam, is that proposition that how can the Prophet ﷺ fail in his marriage to Sayyidah Aisha? How could he fail in his companions after him, Sayyidina Uthman and Muawiyah, etc.? How could we say that about Rasulullah in light of all of the verses that we mentioned? So that's why the majority of Muslims don't believe in that proposition, but rather they said Yazid was a bad guy. There's a literature of cursing Yazid. We all stand with Ahlul Bayt. We all stand with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. We all say alayhi salam after the family of the Prophet in accordance with the Quran. And our love of Imam Ali does not negate the Sunni position that the hierarchies of the Sahaba is that the best amongst the Sahaba was Sayyidina Abu Bakr. Because there are different bests. Best of what? He's like the senior Sahaba. But there is a special place for Imam Ali. The Prophet ﷺ said, Ana Medinatul Ilm wa Ali babuha. I am the city of knowledge and Ali is its door. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever looks at Ali, it's a form of ibadah. It's a sahih hadith. You ask me about it. early this week. It's a Sahih hadith. So our love for Imam Ali is not negated by that afdaliyah. But we do believe that Sayyidina Abu Bakr was rightfully the first Khalifa. It's not like he stole the Khilafah from Sayyidina. That's where the difference between the Sunnis and the Shias would be. But we stand with the people of Ahlul Bayt. Does that make sense? We love the family of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Salah time? Just a couple more minutes.
I have a concern about the use of the word curse. The reason that I don't hear that in any other religion. Not that curse is a word in our religion. Is there a better term that can give all human beings a different view?
Well, it has a place in the Quran that there are certain vile acts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that his curse is on the people that do such and such and such and such. And when that exists, or when the Prophet ﷺ tells us that, that's an indication that that's a grave sin. That's one of the major sins. That's one of the ways that we know if the sin is a minor sin versus a major sin. So when somebody engages in an egregious act, such as the killing of innocent people and women and children and stuff like that, when the ulama say that the curse of Allah is on this person, etc., it's a reminder that that act was a major sin. I think that's where it comes from. But what we're really saying is we're criticizing that act, or that we're saying that's how bad that is that we're so full of love and mercy for everybody that if we say something like that's really how bad it is. That's sort of where it comes from. So it's from the Quran and the Sunnah, but in that way. But maybe it sounds off-putting. I can understand.
It sounds
Harsh.
We are projected as a peaceful religion, and curse is a sort of extreme way of saying something. Another way is to say that may the wrath of Allah be on that person, or in a more positive way, may God forgive him.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I don't see it being said in a church or in any of the other religions, and sometimes people portray Islam because of the battles that were fought as a sort of violent religion, and that I think we should try to avoid that aggression, more rather put the corrective action in a positive way, but it still resonates with what you said, that it's not something acceptable by the religion or by Allah or anyone else. So,
Okay. I'll be more mindful.
And maybe curse the action, not the person.
That's universal. But when we're talking about Yazid and Muawiyah, the reason this word comes up is because unfortunately one of the major disputes between Sunnis and Shias is that there's a literature of Shia actually cursing some of the Sahaba. So that's, I guess, the tongue slips into that word because of it has a specific role in that intra-faith issue. That there's a literature, early literature of Shia scholars doing that. So the Sunni scholars responded and said, no, you could curse Yazid, but not Muawiyah. That's where it came from. So I think there's just background information, and I'll be more sensitive. Now, good to see you.
So, where does the Sunni point of view on Amir Muawiyah and Imam Ali resonate?
That we believe Imam Ali was right, and that Sayyidina Muawiyah was wrong, and it was an issue of ijtihad. Sayyidina Muawiyah, he said, I'm not going to give my allegiance to you until you bring the assassins of Uthman to justice. Because Sayyidina Uthman and Sayyidina Muawiyah, they're from the same clan. Imam Ali's ijtihad was different. He said, well, the last two leaders were assassinated. They were assassinated by non-Arabs. I mean, when they ended up finding they were like a fifth column. So he said, this is a national security crisis. So we need to fix that problem first, and then we can figure out who the assassins of Uthman were, because we have a bigger problem. There's a bigger threat. So in that ijtihad, we believe that Imam Ali was right, not only because he was actually right, but the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Al-Haqqu ma'ali ayyama dar, that the truth is with Ali wherever he goes. So we believe that the ijtihad of Imam Ali was right. And the situation between the Sahabas was unfortunate, but it was based on their ijtihad of the situation. We also believe that the actual fighting that happened between the Sahaba was instigated by that fifth column, not by the Sahaba themselves. And in the fog of war, unfortunately, some of the Sahaba died. And that's really about it. The Sunnis don't like to talk about it more than that, because we don't want to get into the point of criticizing the different Sahaba. We say each of them have their ijtihad. We believe that the ijtihad of Imam Ali was right. What happened was unfortunate. And for those that want to read more, there are very detailed accounts of those situations that will back up what I'm saying.
So is it okay, because Allah says in Quran the mistakes of like different Rasuls, like he talks about Adam alayhi salam, and then he talks about, how Yunus alayhi salam, he talks about, different like Rasuls, like those were trials, we don't say mistakes, but like those are mistakes according to Allah, and he says in Quran. So is it okay to point out those mistakes of Sahaba?
So first of all, we don't say that that there are mistakes of the Anbiya, even if that's the language that Allah Ta'ala uses in the Quran. We say that though theologically all of the Anbiya are infallible, and if they did something, even if Allah says that it's a mistake, Allah caused that to happen for a reason. But that they're, so we don't, other than in the Quranic recitation, we don't say, oh, Adam made a mistake, he did this, Moses made a mistake, he did that, etc. Can you point out and the quote-unquote mistakes of the Sahaba? Yes, because the Sahaba are not infallible. So that's fine. But from the point of view of transmitting the religion, Sunni Muslims, we say all of the Sahaba are just in their ability to transmit the Hadith and to transmit the Quran, the primary sources of Islam. So even if I'm kind of upset that Sayyidina Muawiyah did that to Imam Ali, that doesn't mean I'm going to reject the Hadith of Muawiyah, because he was just. What makes him just is that he was blessed by the vision of the Prophet ﷺ. The definition of the Sahaba is the person whom the Prophet ﷺ saw. Not that that person saw the Prophet ﷺ, but that the Prophet ﷺ saw them. So there's like a spiritual dimension to being a Sahaba. So yeah, I say that Imam Ali was right and Sayyidina Muawiyah was wrong, but if there's a hadith by Sayyidina Muawiyah, I don't say, oh, I'm going to reject this hadith because I'm mad at it, or something like that. That's the difference between where the Sunnis are and where the Shias are. The Shias will reject altogether those hadith. So their hadith corpus is less than ours, because they'll only take it from the Ahlul Bayt and from the Sahaba that were with Imam Ali. Make sense? I mean, it's a longer conversation, but those are the broad strokes. No.
I have a question. The Sahaba who saw the Prophet Muhammad, right? And Prophet Muhammad saw. What about if somebody saw the Prophet Muhammad in his dream?
No, that's Darwish stuff. No, and that's why the definition of the Sahaba is that the Prophet ﷺ saw him in this earthly life. But the barzakh and the dream, hani'an, but it's not going to count as a Sahaba. Or if you even meet the Prophet ﷺ in a waking state, yaqadatan, that doesn't count as a Sahaba. That doesn't count as a Sahaba. Sorry, we missed that cut. Nice try. Okay, everyone happy? Alhamdulillah, no one's offended. We made it through all the controversies. Alhamdulillah. So next week we'll wrap up the spirituality with some practical steps, and then we'll find. I'd like to hear from you what you'd like to discuss next, inshallah.
Thank you.